Okay. So, starting from where we left off last week. So this was the page that we had built out. This was our about page that we had built out. It's not completely done, but we have the basic shell of what we want. At least, this is just like a typical kind of about page. This actually has a video as well as some text to it. It's more than you actually need for this, but this is what I was saying as far as like a typical like kind of interior page, where we would still have the same header as far as like the logo along with the navigation. We still have the same footer, but all the content that would be in between would be different for all of our interior pages. So this sorry, I said about page. This would be like an example of like possibly a video page. But again, you don't necessarily have to have additional text for this video page. Now, when we build this out, this is actually just an image as well as this. This is actually just an image as well. So again, it's not necessarily complete, but we were able to get the basic shell of this design built out from the Photoshop design that I showed you guys last week. Now, one thing you'll remember is that I actually did these menu buttons as text. So I'm going to be showing you again some hover effects that will work for both real live text as well as showing you how to work with images as a hover effect as well. Oh, by the way, if you want to kind of pull up, if you're following along, if you want to pull this up, if you go to the class website, week 6. There is a zip of where we ended up with. That's the last zip, not the pre-class, but the last zip there, if you want to kind of follow along with where we left off. But yeah. So just breezing through some of this HTML, we have the basic HTML template here. We have the HTML tag. We have the head section. With the head section, basically we just simply have the title as well as the link to the CSS file. With the body, we're breaking it down first into the wrapper. So nothing is outside of the wrapper that's still in the body. Everything we have in the wrapper. And the reason why we do that is because we wanted to do this centered column so that everything is centered on the page. The wrapper kind of takes care of everything in this rectangle here. So in our design, we decided that it was okay as far as the background to just kind of crop along with everything else. So we set the background up on the body, but all the content which is inside the wrapper should be centered on that page. So we break this down where we have the wrapper. And then inside the wrapper, we have 3 main sections. We have the header, we have a div with the ID content, and we have a footer. Now, the tags header and footer, as I discussed last week, are really good as far as making your HTML a little bit more clear to yourself. But as we discussed, there's really no difference between using the header tag or using a div with the ID header. Until you actually give it some context in your CSS. So neither one really means anything until you actually open it in CSS and assign it something. But we do have the header, which is currently holding a bunch of anchor tags, which are all surrounding these images. So we have an image for the logo, we have an image for the menu item that says video, we have an image for the menu item that says about. But all of these menu items could very easily also be real text. So we could have video in here, we could have the word about here. And as far as the general positioning would be about the same, and they would still work as anchor tags. It's just we would also have to add in some CSS to make it look kind of like what we have in our design. Now, my rationale for doing these as images was that I definitely wanted to use this real typeface just as it is, but if this is something that I can't find on Google Fonts or Typekit, but I really want to use it, then we can use that as image in that case. Now, I would, of course, again, not recommend doing that for anything which is considered body copy or like the main text page. That we would definitely want to eventually have as real type. So we'd have to make some sort of decision as far as the typeface there. But when it comes to something like a logo or a menu, personally I think it's fine to use images in place of the type if it really matters for your design. So we have our header. It has the logo as well as the menu items. We have the content, which the content right now just simply includes the video and the text box. Each of those is just simply an image, but we would replace this with the real content eventually. And we have a footer, which the footer just simply has a footer image, which would actually be permanent. That's pretty much all we really want for our footer in this case. So, say that this is our say that this is right now our index.html. So if I take this template and I want to create another page off of it, what I would do first is I would actually duplicate the file. Let me make that a little bit more clear. Oh, so I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the actual HTML file. So I have my template basically the way that I want it, as far as the header, as far as the footer, as far as like how it's actually using the wrapper and the background image. We're just simply going to change the content, which is in the middle here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to duplicate the file. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste the file itself, and we're going to rename the file something else. Let's call this one video. And then let's go ahead and open that up in brackets. And based on our video HTML, what we're going to do is we're going to replace what's in the content here. So as far as the HTML is concerned, I'm going to go ahead and take that out. And I'm going to save that. And if I go ahead and open up this page, the video.html now, we simply get our header and our footer. Right now, it's not even really leaving space for our content, which means that right now for our content, it could exist kind of inside of the space that we have set up as far as this height, or if, for example, we have like a history page, which is a lot longer, it would just simply push down this footer image as far down as it needs to. So right now we have a very flexible content area. It's not set in a very specific height. It will just simply scale depending on how much content is actually there. So let's pull up a video if we want to put a video in this space. So if I go to, just like it did where I just pulled it up, embed was grayed out, which means that you wouldn't have the option of embedding this on your page. But assuming that it's actually not, what I can do is I can click on embed, and it's going to give me some code that I can put in my HTML. Now, it also is giving you a few other options here. First of all, when it comes to the width and height, we'll take care of that in a minute. But it's giving you a few other options here, and I would recommend where it says show suggested videos when the video finishes, I would suggest unchecking that. And regarding as far as like the player controls, I would recommend keeping that one checked. And then where it says show video title and player actions, that's up to you. That's basically going to either show this title that it has up here or not. So if you have that unchecked, it's not going to show that title there. So that's up to you. But I would highly recommend as far as not showing the suggested videos, because then it could show a bunch of videos that is not actually related to your content. But whenever you're finished with that, you can go ahead and copy the code which is in the top right hand corner of this pop-up. And I'm going to go ahead and put that in my content area here. So this gives us what is called an iframe. An iframe is basically a window into a completely other a website, a completely different website. So this iframe right now, as you can see from the attributes width and height, this is a very specific width and height of 560 by 315. And inside that area, it's going to give us, again, a window into a completely different website. That website is specified in this SRC. So in the same way that we use the SRC with the image tag, the SRC for the iframe is the reference to the other website that we are getting a peek into. So if I go ahead and take a look at this, oh, and a lot of these other attributes are specific to things which are helping the YouTube video itself. But typically when we do an iframe, we mostly worry about these three as far as the width and height, as well as the SRC, which is where it's actually going. So let's take a look. So when I go to load this video, our content is basically, it's going to be within our wrapper. Everything is within our wrapper, which means it's going to be the center column. But it's going to place this right underneath our header, right above our footer. And right now it's putting it all the way on the left, and it's at this specific size. So you might decide that, at least for our video page, if this is the only content on our page, we might want it centered. But before we do that, let's actually take a look at the size of the video before we actually worry about the centering of it. So one thing I could do is I could say, I actually want this to be a little bit wider. Let's go ahead and set the width to, what's the width on our wrapper right now? I'm going to open up our style CSS. Our wrapper right now, it has a width of 1100 pixels. So let's set this YouTube video to a width of 1000 pixels. Okay. So you'll see that what it does is it's setting up this area. We have 1000 pixels, and I only changed the width. I did not change the height. It's setting up this video at 1000 pixels wide, and it's really trying to fill in that area as much as possible. But then when I go to play it, you'll see that it's actually still only taking up it's only taking up the exact width and height that it can. So it's basically filling in the rest of the space with black, because it's not going to stretch the video. It's not going to stretch the video. It's not actually going to crop the video. Even though when I first come to the page, it looks like it might end up cropping the video, it's actually, when it actually goes to play it, it's just going to try and fill as much of the area as it can. So whether you adjust the width or you adjust the height, like if I put down the width back down to about 600, let's say I make the height a lot more. Again, it's going to look like it's cropping the video, but when you actually go to play it, it's not going to crop it, it's not going to stretch it, it'll just fill in all the extra space with black. So there's a few different ways of doing this, figuring out how you want to actually make the image or make the video itself bigger. The easiest way that I go about it is I look at what the width and height is naturally. So before we made any changes, the width was 560 and the height was 315. Let's go to make just a Photoshop document that's at that size. 560 by 315. Yep. So then when I go to resize this, if I have the image size locked as far as the width and height, then I can change one of these values. So I can say 1000, and it'll tell me what the height should be for that width, to keep it in proportion. So we're going to do 1000 by 563. You can't read that up there. So that way, as I resize it, it's going to stay in proportion to the original video. So now when I go to play this, we don't get any extra black area around it. Maybe just a little bit on the top and bottom, it looks like. But for the most part, it's staying in proportion with the original size of the video. Any questions on that? Okay. So, we had this. We have our wrapper, which is currently taking up 1100 pixels, and our video is 1000 pixels. So what we could do is, if we want to make sure that our video is centered within this area, is we can go into our style sheet and we could make a change to content, for example. We could set up a width of 1000 pixels, and then we can use the margin 0 pixels auto, because remember that the combination of these two, as far as the 1000 pixels and the margin 0 pixels auto, will center whatever that content actually is. However, we want to be careful about this, because right now I'm doing this on the div that has the ID content. In my video page, this is where the div is that has that video, ID content, and on my index I have these two elements inside of the div that has the ID content. Assuming we're using the same style sheet for all of our HTML pages, we want to be careful when we're referencing the same exact ID or classes, and we're going from one page to another. So in our style sheet, we have a lot of different things for the wrapper that we want to remain the same for all of our interior pages. We have things for the header, and as far as the image with the class spacer, we have things as far as like what the footer looks like. All of that's fine going from page to page. But then when it comes to our content, actually we might want our content to be different from page to page. So there's a few different ways that we can handle this. One common way of doing this is that for the body of each of your HTML pages, what we can do is we can add in either an ID or class. So for our video page, we can put in ID video page, and for our index, we could put in an ID that would be like home or index. Then what we could do is in our style CSS, instead of setting up the width 1000 pixels, the margin 0 pixels auto on div content, what we could do is we could keep whatever we know is going to be about the same. Like, so maybe this margin top is going to be about the same on all of them. But on the video page, we know we can identify this because the body has an ID of video page. So what we can do is we can say body hash video page, then space div hash content. So by doing space div hash content, then we're talking about the div that has the ID content that is inside of the body with video page. So here I can set up a width of 1000 pixels and a margin 0 pixels auto. And I know this is only going to apply to the video page because only the video HTML has the body with the ID video page here. All of our other pages would have a different ID for the body. So this is one way of setting this up so that in our style CSS, we can use the same definition, div hash content, but we can set up something different for body hash home space div hash content, and maybe that one has a different width to it if it has less content, for example. We could do a margin of a width of 500 pixels, margin 0 pixels auto. So this one will only apply to the home page, and this one will only apply to the video page, because we set up in the body tag, we set up an ID of home, or we set up an ID of video page. So this is one way of doing it, so that we can still use div content, but have a different setup for the home and the video page. Another common way of doing this, if we don't have those IDs, we can keep them in there, they're not really bothering anybody. But we can, if we don't have those IDs in there, another way of doing this is inside of content, we can decide to have another div. So inside of content, we can say div ID home content. And we're going to make sure we end that div before we end the content. And I'm going to go ahead and tab these other guys over. So inside of our index.html, which is also our home page, inside of content, we have a div with the ID home content here. Then inside of our video page, we have our div with the ID content, but inside of that, we're going to have another div with the ID home underscore, video underscore content. And I'm going to go ahead and tab over that line. So in this case, what I'm doing is, instead of determining what the page is in the body, I'm instead determining what the page is inside of our div content. So for our home page, I have a div with the ID home content. Inside of our video page, I have a div with the ID video content. Then in our CSS, instead of setting this up with what we have as far as body home and body video page, what I would do instead is I would apply whatever is different, like for example the width and the margins. I would apply whatever is different to home underscore content from our home page, and video underscore content from our video page. And then where I have div content as the kind of container for both of these, I would only put in things that are just applied to that container. So I wouldn't put anything that isn't going to match all of my other pages. So yeah, that's two ways of kind of, again, using the same template where we have the header, we have a div with the ID content in the middle and a footer. We have that same template through all of our interior pages, but we need some way of determining something different from the home page to the video page in how it's actually addressing the content. Good question.
I was going to say that when I was trying to do div with a div like that, it was really into a lot of problems. I see. So you can do that, can you?
We can have a div, yeah, we can have divs inside of divs as a way of singling out our major big containers along with the smaller content that's inside. However, again, it's one of those things that's a personal choice. So if it makes more sense as to kind of set up the identification for that particular page in the body, and that way you can kind of simplify, like having divs inside of divs, then again, that way certainly will also work. Whenever you have like divs inside of divs, the tabbing that I'm doing here, the indentation, is completely optional as far as it working. However, it is extremely helpful to the programmer as far as being able to see like what is inside of what. Exactly. Brackets also does help you out, where if you click anywhere inside the beginning div, it'll show you what that where that ending closing tag is.
What does it mean you need to escape out of it, and it shows you?
Escape out of?
If you need it. it shows an error. I see it a lot. It says that you, and it says, like it'll, on line, say, 28, because you have to dip under it, it'll show an error that says you need to escape out of the
It's something you can pull up. I can take a look at it.
and then it shows the little like wicked bracket, but I don't know what it means by that because it looks just like yours. It has the end on the image and it has the lovely.
Yeah, if it's something you can pull up, I can take a look. Any other questions on this so far? Sure. Okay. So yeah, with the two columns, it's just kind of wrapping this a little bit more. But if this is, if we want to do it this way, where we have an extra div inside of, yes, where we have an extra div inside of our content. Again, I'm kind of deciding, as the designer, I'm deciding that I want to split my page up into three major sections: the header, content, and the footer. So I'm going to have those three major sections in all of my interior pages: header, content, footer. So one way that we can determine as far as like how the content looks a little bit different from the video page to what I'm calling the home page is we establish a second div inside of the content, and then we can do whatever our formatting is for that second interior div. The other way, which I just showed you, you're not necessarily doing both at the same time, but the other way is if we have a ID on the body itself. So if we have an ID on the body itself that is different from page to page, so this index has home and this video.html has video page. If we do it that way, then what we could do is in the CSS, we could say body hash video page, just like we have here. We're talking about the body that has the ID video page, and then we do a space div hash content. And if we do it this way, then we can keep using the same exact div with the ID content, and we can determine any sort of different formatting for just that one div. If we do it this way, then what that does is it saves us from having to do another interior div here. So we could take that one out, so that inside of content, there would just be the iframe. Or inside of, for the body one, inside of content, we would just have these two side-by-side divs, one for text box and video. So again, both methods work. It's mostly a matter of personal preference that you as the designer can say, you know, I don't want too many divs inside of divs. Or you could say like, well, I find the CSS a little bit more confusing where we have like one thing inside of the other. So it's perfectly up to you. Any other questions? Okay. So for mine, let's go ahead and use the body ID option. I'm a big fan of that one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep using the same div content. I'm not going to have that interior extra div. And I'm just going to utilize where we have the ID for the body here. So inside my video page, again, I do not have a div inside of content. I'm just using content itself. Which means in our CSS, instead of having div hash home content, I'm going to use body hash video page, and then I'm going to have the div hash content to specify that I'm going to have this at a width of 1000 pixels, and I'm using margin 0 pixels auto to center that video. So the 1000 pixels I'm getting from the iframe. Is this more or less confusing having the CSS next to the HTML? I go back and forth here. Side by side? Okay. So, this is usually how I work personally. I just didn't know as far as viewing it if it's more or less confusing. Yes, I'm getting the 1000 pixels from the iframe itself. I decided with the Photoshop that I wanted to increase it to 1000 pixels, and we used the width and margin in order to center those two together. So we have this video. We have it centered kind of on the page within the wrapper itself. And again, for the most part, we don't have too much black on like the sides or on the top and bottom, because we make sure that it's proportionate as we increase the size of it. Okay. So next, let's go ahead and talk about the overflow. That should be fairly quick. So if we were to do a history page, again, let's go ahead and take one of our HTML pages. It doesn't matter too much which one, because this template is very similar. But let's take one of our HTML pages, let's copy and paste it, and we're going to title this one History. So I'm going to go ahead and open up History in brackets. I'm going to make sure that the body, in the same way that I'm using the video page for the video page, I'm going to make the ID for the body on our history page. I'm going to call it history page. I'm going to go down to our content, and for now I'm going to take out this iframe so that we're left with just the basic shell of our interior pages. Which again, if we take a look at that, is just our header and our footer. Now, let's go ahead and grab some for our content. So a few paragraphs here. And I'm going to put that here in our content. So because we're actually using these as real paragraphs, let's actually use the paragraph tag. Very often I don't use the paragraph tag because it sometimes has extra padding or margin that I don't always want. So very often I'm using the div as a way of creating different sections on my page. But whenever we're talking about real paragraphs, then yeah, sure, let's use the paragraph tag itself. Let's use it for what it's meant for. So I'm using the paragraph tag, which means that again, it will be adding in a little bit of extra margin or padding for us, but we can always customize that to our liking later on anyway. So we have these paragraphs set up in content. If I take a look at this in the HTML, or I'm sorry, in the browser, we have these paragraphs which are just kind of sitting on this space background. Everything's in black, making it, I would say, challenging to read. So there's a few different ways that we can handle this. First, in our CSS, let's talk about this content different from the content on all the other pages. So in my CSS, do the same way that I did this for video page, I'm going to say body hash history page, which is the ID that I have for the body here. So I'm going to do body hash history page space, div hash content. So again, because I have that space, it's saying the thing that's on the right is inside of the thing that's on the left. So right now we're talking about the div content that's inside of history page. So one of the things I can do is I can set the text color by just using color to white. And if I do that on our dark background here, then that makes the text at least a little bit easier to read. But I don't know. I think that the text is still kind of hard to read on that space background. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm actually going to put this text on its own real color background so that it's going to be as easy to read as possible. Whenever you have text on top of some sort of actual image, and whenever it's relative, it's going to be hard to read. But increasing the size, increasing the contrast can definitely help. But if we're really, really focused on readability, which I would say that we are when it comes to body copy, then I think that it's going to be best to have it on a solid color, or at least a semi-transparent solid color. So what I'm going to do is, this is the body history page. We're talking about the div content. Instead of changing the color of the text, let's go ahead and give it a background color. So for now, let's go ahead and just make it a white background. Oh, yes, good point. So typically we have 6 values for the hex. If we only put in 3, what it's going to do is going to duplicate what those 3 are for each one. Now, what I mean by that is if we have 1, 2, 3, which actually is a real hex number. If we have 1, 2, 3, what that means is the same thing as saying 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3. So whatever that first one is, it's going to duplicate that. Whatever the second one is, it's going to duplicate that. And whatever the third one is, it's going to duplicate that. So sometimes people will put in a shortcut of having just the 3 numbers. Usually people will do it when it's something that is grayscale. So they'll do it for white, black, or something that's gray. So if I put in CCC, I know that's going to be all C's, which is a shade of gray. I know if I put in 000, it's going to be all zeros. Same thing with FFF. It might be good practice to always use the 6, just so you're kind of used to it, because if we do something that is not gray, anything that's not gray is not going to have a pattern that we can put into 3. So a lot of times if we're using a specific color which is not some shade of gray, we always have to have the 6. But yeah, there are those occasions where it will kind of work out with just using the 3. So I have a background color that's going to be all white on my content. Let's take a look at that. And if we don't change, oh, I didn't save my CSS. If we don't change the text color, then that means the text color is going to be black on top of that white background. So we're gonna, it's going to look like this. So let's actually also make the text size a little bit bigger. I'm going to go ahead and set the font size. Let's see what 20 pixels looks like. There, that's a little bit better. So if I'm fine with the size of the text, I'm fine with the contrast of this black on top of this white, I might not be fine with how long this page is. I might say, I really like the fact that these other pages, that the footer down here stays on the screen for the most part. And it's just a much shorter page. I don't want to give people too much scrolling. I want to be clear. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with scrolling. I'm saying that if you, as the designer, would like to create a website like where it's mostly going to be the same height for all of them, then you have the ability to control that. So what I can do is, if I want to set this up so that our content area only exists at like this height, so that it kind of stops right here, and then we just scroll inside this area, then I have to do two things. First, I have to decide what size I'm actually working with here. So let's go ahead and give this content a width. Let's give a width of, let's go with 800 pixels. And let's also give it a height of, let's say, 400 pixels. So let's take a look at that. Okay. So, oh, I forgot I already have the overflow auto in here. Let's take that out for a second. Okay. So, we have our content area, which is 800 pixels by 400 pixels. Now you see that normally our text just simply pours out over top of that background image that we have there, background color that we have there. So, whenever we have a specific width and height on a div, but the content itself needs to be more than that, and again, content can be both text as well as images. If the content itself needs to be more than that, then it's just going to kind of spill out of that container. So even though we're trying to rein it in with 800 by 400, we have a background color on it. If we had a border or a background image, it would still stop at the 800 pixels and stop at the 400 pixels. But the content would still spill out over top of that. So this is where we have a property that's called overflow, which you can see that I quickly took it out of the content. We had it in there before for the home page. We'll get back to that in a minute. But if in the content we add in overflow, we have a few different options for overflow. First, we could potentially say hidden. What hidden will do is it will just simply hide that extra text here, and it's just simply cropping that space. It's relatively rare when you would use hidden, because right now the visitors have no way of actually scrolling or getting to that extra content. There's a couple of occasions here and there that you would use hidden, but it's, like I said, pretty rare. Visible is actually the default functionality, which means the text itself is going to be visible. Again, we very rarely use the default functionality. There's no purpose in having that because it would do that if we didn't have this property at all. So the two most common ways that we use overflow is either scroll. Now scroll might sound like it's perfect. Scroll will give us the scroll bars. However, the one thing about scroll is that whenever you put in overflow scroll, it's going to give you both a horizontal scroll bar as well as a vertical scroll bar. So right now, as I scroll, it's scrolling vertically, which is fine, which is what we want. It's still giving us that horizontal scroll bar, even though we aren't actually using it, even though we don't actually need it. There are ways that we can set it up so that things would actually scroll horizontally if we actually set up images or we set up text. Like if we had like maybe 5 columns of information here and we could scroll that horizontally there. There's ways of setting that up. In that case, we would actually use this horizontal scroll bar. But right now, when we're just talking about text, it's just going to wrap the text based on the width, which means that we're only actually using the vertical scroll bar. So overflow scroll will give us both scroll bars. If we put in overflow auto, then that's only going to give us the scroll bar that we actually need. So in this case, because we only need to go vertical, it's only giving us a vertical scroll bar in that area. So some people like to have both scroll bars there just to kind of give it just to kind of give it like the sense of like a normal like Word document or something like that, just to kind of give people the sense that this is an area that you're scrolling both directions. But if we're not actually using the horizontal, I would recommend doing overflow auto, because then you're not kind of wasting kind of design space with anything you don't actually need. But again, we are able to do this as far as like have more content than that area by having both a width and a height as well as the overflow auto. Both of those things together will allow us to have a scrollable area. Now, yes. Okay. So very often when we're trying to center things, very often we can use a text align center if we're just talking about real content like text or images. If we're talking about a box, like some sort of container, typically we use a width as well as the margin 0 pixels auto. That will do the centering. So, right now, yeah, exactly. We have the width 1000 pixels, we have the margin 0 pixels auto here where we have the video page. But the way that we had decided to distinguish between the different pages, at least the way I decided to do it, is I'm using the ID history page, and I'm always referencing the div content rather than creating an inner div. So that means that if I want that content to be centered, then I will also need to do a very similar thing here with the body hash history page space div hash content. So we already have the width here. We have the width of 800 pixels. The only thing we need in addition to the width is we need the margin 0 pixels auto. Now, I keep saying margin 0 pixels auto. The main thing is that we're doing auto on both the left and the right. When we put in just two values for margin, the first one is going to be the margin on the top and the bottom. And sometimes you don't want 0 pixels on the top and bottom. Sometimes you actually want to give a little bit of space. But the important thing is actually the auto. We have a margin of auto on both the left and the right. That is what's centering it along with the width. We have a width and we have a margin auto on left and right. The 0 pixels is arbitrary. Maybe we want it, maybe we don't. But it's the combination of the width as well as the margin auto on the left and right. So, we have the width, we have the margin 0 pixels auto, and that will center that in that space. Now, just from a design perspective, yeah, I actually would like to space this out a little bit more. So instead of margin 0 pixels auto, let's give it margin 40 pixels auto. And doing it on the top and bottom, that will space it out from the header as well as the footer. I also would like to give this a little bit of space from the edge. Again, this is from a design perspective. So on this content, let's go ahead and add in a padding of about 20 pixels. So that keeps it from going right up against that edge there. Now it's still up against the edge here where we have the top and the bottom as far as like when it's actually doing the scrolling. But at the very least, when we first start to scroll it, it does not have that, it's not right up against the edge there. And when we scroll to the bottom, it's not up against the edge there. There is a way of, even as you're scrolling it, that there would still be extra space there, but there's a few different ways of doing it. Probably the easiest way of doing it is this. In addition to the padding that we have here, as far as 20 pixels, what we could do is we can add in a white border. So, say I put in a border of 10 pixels, solid, and let's call it red, which is, of course, FF0000. Everyone knows that's red, right? So we have a red border around this, and as we scroll through this, it's not touching that red border. So, if I make, instead of a red border, if I make it a white border, then we still have that space around this, which means that as I scroll, again, it's not bumping right up against that edge there. We have a little bit of space there as we scroll through this area. So I like that a lot better. That's pretty nice. One last thing while we're here. When it comes to a background color, there's a way of adding in a slight transparency to that background color. So if you're doing a background image, I would recommend saving the background image itself with that transparency. Like if you want a slightly transparent like space image, then you can actually make it slightly transparent in Photoshop and save it as a PNG 24, and it will save it with that transparency. However, if we're dealing with a background color instead of a background image, and we want a slight transparency to it, then what we can do is we can change how we're actually doing this background color here. So, instead of a hexadecimal version of that color, and instead of just simply a color name itself, like red, we're going to do the background color in a slightly different way. Now, actually, before I do this, there is a CSS property out there that's called opacity. And this is a place where a lot of students get confused. Opacity is on a scale of 0 to 1, which might not seem like a lot of options there. But you can do decimals. So if you do an opacity of 0.5, then that's going to set this at a 50% opacity. Now, when I take a look at that, it kind of looks like it's doing what I'm talking about. It looks like we have a slightly transparent background. But what it's actually doing is it's putting a 50% opacity on the entire container. So we're doing this on opacity on div content, which means that it's doing it not just on the container itself, but also everything that's inside of that container. So we have opacity 50% on content. And that means it's not only making the background slightly transparent, but it's making the text on top of that slightly transparent. There are ways of doing opacity, which is very, very helpful. But if your purpose is to make the background slightly transparent, that's a bad way of doing that, because again, it's going to make the content also transparent. So, back to the right way. If we want to make the background color slightly transparent, then in our CSS, we're going to say background color. And the value for this is going to be slightly weird. We're going to say RGBA, that exact set of 4 letters, RGBA, a set of parentheses, and a semicolon. So this is a little similar to when we do background image. We have URL, we have a set of parentheses, and inside that URL we specify our actual image, the path to that image, and the image file. But with RGBA, inside these parentheses, we're going to give 4 different values. One for R, one for G, one for B, and one for A. And we're going to separate those 4 values with commas. So we're going to have a number here like 10, 20, 30, and then 1. So these 4 values represent the 4 values of R, G, B, and A. The first one represents the red, second one represents the green, third one represents the blue, and the last one represents the alpha, or the opacity. So some design firms call it like the alpha layer or the opacity layer, basically saying what that, how transparent it is. So, where do we get those numbers? Well, personally, I like the color picker. So, where we go to the color picker for like Photoshop or Illustrator or any of the Adobe programs, whenever we actually pick what a color we want, in addition to the hex, we also get these numbers for R, G, and B here. So, just so you know, the R, G, and B is going to be on a scale of 0 to 255, but if you pick the color that you actually want, you know what a color that is. You can pick up what the R, G, and B is from these 3 points here. We have 32, 78, 195. That's going to go in the first 3 numbers here. 32, 78, 195. If we want that color. I'm just going to let you know right off the bat that when it comes to white, that's going to be 255, 255, 255. Now the last one, the A, works the same exact way as the opacity. It's on a scale of 0 to 1, which means we're going to use a percentage, decimal point. So if we want this at 50% opacity, we would put in a 0.5. So when we do it this way, we have a solid white. When we do it this way, we also have a white, but it also gives us a 50% opacity. So let's take a look at that. Now, if you'll remember, before I refresh this is how it looked when we did the opacity at 50%. It's doing both the background color itself as well as the text. When I go to refresh this, it looks very similar, but the text itself is not at an opacity anymore. Also, the border is also not at an opacity, which means that it is the text itself is a lot more bold, but we still have a slight opacity to that background color. Now 50% in my opinion is a little bit low. I would bump it up to at least 80, maybe 90. And the purpose of this is sometimes you have a background image where you don't want to just cover it completely. You want to show the visitor just a little bit of that background image, but not in a way that sacrifices the readability of the text on top of it. I personally believe that when it comes to like your body copy, that you really should prioritize readability over everything else. But I think that there is room for getting some of that design element if you want to kind of give the visitors a little bit of a peek at that background. This is the way a lot of designers will do it, is they'll have a slightly transparent background to give visitors some sense of that, and give like the content area a bit of texture as well. Yes?
I have a question about that. I would like about page I was playing with. I used a very simple sensor. I like it in bold, but when I look at so many other sites, they don't usually have the text in bold. It's readable in normal, and it looks okay, but I just thought that the page really pops with the text in bold.
Well, it really depends, just from a design perspective.
Yeah.
It really depends a lot on the typeface itself. There are some typefaces which the bold version of it is very bold, and if we have several paragraphs that we're really actually trying to read, we're not just like having like a brief overview of it, we're really actually trying to read that. It might be a little straining on the eyes, like when everything is bold. But again, it depends a lot on the specific typeface you're actually using. A good rule of thumb is that, like when we said, like, you know, with the type, when we make everything bold and nothing is bold, which means that it's we're not using bold to actually highlight something and bring the importance out of it. Everything kind of just blends together. So it depends a lot on the context. Like with Banksy, I think that like we're dealing with graffiti, we're thinking of that kind of very thick, like, you know, typeface that, you know, we normally see with tags. It might be appropriate for that context. With the typeface itself, well, we have to take a look at that, see if it's straining on the eyes when it comes to, and the size of it's also going to play a major factor in that as well, to see if it hurts the readability.
I did look at that, and I'll send it to you, because I'd like to get your opinion on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions on this before we move on? Okay. So I'd like to also get into the photo gallery. Now, in the next web classes, there's going to be a much bigger focus on JavaScript. We're supposed to go over JavaScript next week, which I want to at least introduce, but we're not going to go that deep into it. But when we do have the tools of JavaScript under our belts, then we can also use what are called plugins, which will have which we can use like photo galleries that look like this, where we have what's called often a light box. The light box is something where we click on a thumbnail and it shows a much bigger version of that image in the same window. So we just simply close out of that and we can open up another one, or sometimes these will have arrows going between the different photos to go through a gallery that way. A lightbox is a very, very common version of a photo gallery because what we can do is we can start off with thumbnails, and we can kind of see an overview of all the images, and then the viewer can choose which one they actually want to see a bit bigger. Another common version of a photo gallery would be a slideshow. So one of my favorite slideshow plugins is this Cycle 2, where let me pull it up. Where you already starting off with a fairly large image. We don't start off with a thumbnail. We start off with a relatively large image, and usually there's some kind of navigation. Sometimes like we have these little bullets, sometimes we have arrows that will go between those different photos. So the two most common kind of galleries is we either have thumbnails, which enlarge to larger images, or we have a slideshow with where it's already starting off large and it's going from image to image. Because we're not getting that deep into JavaScript this semester, what we're going to do is we're going to do kind of the little bit of a version of like the thumbnail one, where we're going to start off with thumbnails. As you click on the thumbnails, it's going to link to that original image, which means we're still going to get a sense of like the full size, but it's just simply going to open it up in a different window or tab. So what we're going to do is first, if you're using the zip that I provided on the class website, there is an images folder that has the different backgrounds as well as the menu text. There's also a folder called Gallery. Inside of Gallery, I have, these aren't huge, but they're relatively what we're calling the big size images. And they're all different crops, all different sizes. And we have a folder inside of Gallery called Thumb. Now the ones inside of Thumb are not only the exact same crop, but also the exact same size. So we have thumbnails, which are all the same ratio and size. And we have the larger images, which vary a lot. Now, I'm putting Thumb inside of the Gallery folder. I have a folder inside of the folder inside of the folder. That's my personal folder structure that I like to use. But it's completely up to you as far as like how you actually want to organize your files, as long as, again, it's something that makes sense to you and kind of find what you need relatively simple. Find what you need both in the Explorer, but also the File Explorer, but also when you're actually coming up with these SRCs, you can actually use logic to distinguish between the thumbnails and the larger images. Now, when it comes to a thumbnail gallery, something that might look something like this. It's a good idea to have separate photos for your thumbnails as well as your larger images. Now, you don't necessarily have to. You can always use CSS, or you can use the image attributes to resize your photos themselves. But even more important than them all being the same size, even more important than them being different files themselves, what's even more key is the fact that they're all the same crop. They're all the same ratio. So I'm going to be using thumbnails which are going to be a 1x1. They're just squares. You could also use ones which are mostly landscape or mostly portrait. That's fine, just as as long as they're all the same ratio, because you don't want to stretch your images. Stretching images will it really cheapens the look of the image. So whatever you're actually trying to showcase, it's not going to do it justice if you're stretching those images. So even if you're trying to do this very, very quick and you don't want to create separate files and you just want to use CSS or the image attributes to resize your images, you at the very least want to make sure they're the same crop. That way you're not stretching those files themselves. But like I said, I recommend having separate thumbnail files, just like this, that I have in my thumb directory. And when you do those separate thumbnail files, then you can, in Photoshop, make sure they're the same crop and same size. So, let's go ahead in our files. I'm going to go ahead and create another HTML page. I'm going to pick any one of these, and I'm going to call it photo. You can also call it gallery or whatever makes the most sense. I'm going to go ahead and open this up in brackets. And just like we were doing for the other pages, I'm going to go ahead and change the ID of the body. I'm going to call it photo. And I'm going to get rid of whatever is inside of the content for that photo gallery, or for that photo HTML page. So when I take a look at this, again, before I put any extra content in there, I still have my header, I still have my background, I still have my footer. All of them are still using the same CSS. So as long as I don't make any changes, to these general things as far as the header or the div content or the text, well, text box is technically inside of the home. But any general changes to any of those other tags, then all of our template pages will look the same. So if we want to set up a grid of thumbnails, very similar to this, there's a few different ways that we can do it. First, let's go ahead and put in our image tags themselves. So I'm going to put in image src equals brackets is helping us out here, but we know that from this HTML file, whenever we're trying to determine the src for an image tag or the href for an anchor tag, we always start with the file that we're actually editing. So from this HTML file, we have to go inside of images, we have to go inside of gallery, we have to go inside of thumb. And then we can find the photo we're actually looking for. So we have to put in the folder images, gallery, and thumb. Then the photo I'm actually looking for is photo01.jpg. And then we can go ahead and end off that image tag. Now, just as a bit of a heads up, I'm going to go ahead and give this image tag a class, and let's call it thumb. Now, before I start copying and pasting this as like my image thumb template, let's also give it an anchor tag. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap a anchor tag around this image tag. I could do this all in one line, or I could have it on separate lines. It doesn't matter too much. The href for this anchor tag that's wrapping around this image tag, I'm going to have the thumbnail link to the large version of that image. So we're going to say the href is going to go to images, gallery, and we're just going to look for photo 01.jpg. So the href, the link is going to go to the large image. The src for the image itself is the thumbnail. So right now, if I take a look at this, even before I start doing the other thumbnails, is we have the small thumbnail, and when I click on that, it's linking to the larger version of the uncropped version of that photo. Now you will notice that it's actually opening in the same exact window or tab that I have here. I could also have it open in a different tab or window. If in the anchor tag, if I add in as an attribute target equals blank. So target equals actually underscore blank will force it to open up in a separate tab or window. It might be a tab, it might be a window, but that is actually based more on the visitor's browser settings, which unfortunately we can't control. Unfortunately, we can't control other people's computers. That would be nice. But depending on the person's browser settings, it might open a different tab, it might open up a different window. But we tell the browser that we want it to open in one of those by putting in target blank. So now, when I click on it, you can see that it's. I might not save this. Yes, I didn't save it. We still have the dot here. So save. So now, when I refresh it, when I click on it, it's actually opening up in a separate tab. So that way people can simply close it rather than clicking and going back. So it's kind of up to you what makes more sense to you, whether you want people to hit the back button to go back to your page or close that tab or window in order to go back to it. For now, let's go and keep it in there. I could either go either way on that. But I think this gives us... actually one other thing. Before I start copying and pasting this for our other images, I actually am going to change this up a little bit. I'm going to put the class thumb on the anchor tag and not the image tag. And I'll explain in a minute. But I'm going to take it out of the image tag and I'm going to put it into the anchor tag instead. So we're going to call this thumb. Now, let's go ahead and copy this template that we have. We're going to copy it over and over again to fill out all of our thumbnails. Now, I named all my thumbnails and my larger images with numbers. You don't necessarily have to do that, but it certainly makes this a little bit simpler. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And we just want to make sure that we change the image name for both the thumbnail as well as the href, where it's actually going, in all these cases. And as you copy this template over and over again, you just want to be careful. You want to make sure that you're matching the thumbnail to the larger image, because it can get easy to get off center with this and like the wrong image to the wrong thumbnail. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So naturally what it's going to do is an image is an inline element, which means that just like text, it's just going to put everything in line. Everything is just right next, each image is just right next to each other. There's a tiny little bit of space in between each one. That's mostly just because we have like line breaks here and we have spaces here. If we had, it's hard to see this first one. Let's take number 2 and number 3. If we had exactly no spaces between the anchor tag and the image tag, and we had exactly no spaces between that anchor tag and the next image tag, so pretty much everything was all in one line, then they would be exactly right next to each other. But that can be hard to read. So we'll leave it at like that for now. So so the HTML is going to consider one space. So if we take out all the spaces like I just did, yes, they are going to be flush next to each other. But once we add in one space, it's going to add in one space of, like as if this was text, one space there. Now, from there, if I put in a bunch of different line breaks and a bunch of different spaces in here, then the browser is not going to make any changes there. It's still going to consider that to be one space. So the browser does count one space there, but no more than one space. So we discussed this last time with the navigation. There's a few different ways that we can add space here. First, if you want, this you can put in ampersand NBSP, which stands for non-breaking space, and these 6 characters here represents one space. So this is going to put one space in between this first and the second one, and I can put in as many of those as I want to put in extra spaces that way. Another way we can do it, which we actually ended up with our header, is we have an image tag, which is a going to spacer.gif. Spacer.gif is a 1x1 pixel transparent image. So if we use the spacer GIF, and this is a 1x1 transparent image that we're going to put in between photo 1 and photo 2. Then in our CSS, just like we're doing here, in our CSS we can say image with the class spacer. It's going to have a height of 1 but a width of 30 pixels. That's stretching that image, meaning that we're putting 30 pixels of space, 30 pixels of width between whatever that image tag actually is. So those are 2 ways we can add in some manual space there. However, it's going to be a little bit more efficient, at least with these thumbnails, to do it in a slightly different way. That's fine when we're just dealing with the navigation like we have up here, but here we really want to set up a grid and we really want to control the amount of space between each of these a little bit better than that. So we're going to do a few different things here. First, we had the foresight to put in a class for each of these anchor tags. That's a good thing. We have a class because we're using it over and over again, and it's going to give us something to use in our CSS rather than just simply talking about an anchor tag, which could represent multiple anchor tags on our website. So we have the anchor tag with the class thumb. And we can represent that in the CSS by saying a.thumb. Now, if we were afraid, am I going to be using the class thumb in any of my other pages? If we're afraid of that, then what we can do is we can specify the body that is, I'm calling these pages. Photo page. We could specify that this is body hash photo page space a thumb. And we would do this if we were afraid that we might be using the class thumb in any of other pages. But if you think that you're not, then you don't necessarily have to put that. It's not going to make a difference one way or the other. It's not going to hurt anything, but it's an option. But if I'm confident that I'm not using that class anywhere in my rest of my website, then that's fine. So we have a thumb. Now, an anchor tag, like an image tag, is also an inline element, which means that it's just going to be in line with everything else. This is why we can put a link just anywhere within our text because it's an inline element. What we're going to do is we're going to force it to be a block level element. We're going to force it to be a block level element so that we can give it some extra padding. Padding, you might find sometimes works with inline elements, but it's kind of a browser-to-browser thing. The most reliable way to use padding or margin is with block level elements. So, in order to force the anchor tag to be a block level element, I'm going to use the property display. Now sometimes we use display to say display none if we're trying to hide something temporarily. A lot of times we'll get into that when it comes to some JavaScript stuff. But display we typically use in one of two ways. We either say block or we say inline. And that will force whatever we currently have to be either a block level element or an inline element. So first, let's set it to display block. Now, immediately when I do that, just like any sort of div, it's going to make every single anchor tag on its own line. That's not what we want, but we're getting close to what it is that we want. So we start off by making the block level element, and then we're going to add in a float. So we're going to say float left. Now, when we were doing the home page, we had a float left and a float right on our video and our text box. When we did that, we have the video page itself, we have it floating to the left, we have the text floating to the right. If I'm using float left on all of the thumbnails, then that's still actually going to keep them. Each and every one is going to be trying to float to the left, but it is going to go in order. So this one is floating to the left, which means it's going to try to be to the left as much as possible. The next one's going to float to the left, which means that it's just going to kind of fall in line with the rest of those. So we can use float left on all of these at the same time, and it's still going to try and put it in horizontal fashion. So far it doesn't look like we've made much progress here. We've gone from them all being on one line to them all being on different lines, and now they're all on one line again. But now we can go ahead and use padding or margin, and in this case I would actually go with margin. So we're going to put in a margin. Let's go ahead and put in let's just use the two values for now. So we'll do a margin of 20 pixels and a margin of 40 pixels. So we have 20 pixels, 40 pixels, 20 pixels being on the top and bottom, 40 pixels being on the left and right. And what that's going to do is it's going to space these out where it has 20 pixels between each of these here, between each of the rows, and 40 pixels between each of the columns. If we take a look at this in the inspect element, as we highlight on any one of the anchor tags, in the yellow it's showing us where that margin is coming into play. So right now it's putting in, again, space at the top and bottom, which is representing the rows, and space on the left and right, which is representing the columns. If I go ahead and try and edit this in our inspect element, as I change that 20 pixels, it's spacing this out more and more as far as the different rows here. So this is 10 pixels, this is 20 pixels, this is 30 pixels. If I change the second value where we have 40 pixels, not only is it shrinking the amount of space here, but it's also determining how many we have on each row. So if I only want 3 on each row, I might go with this high value here where we have 120. If I want 4 on each row, then I have to go somewhere between where we have 60 here and 90 here. It would have to be somewhere up between there. So I think that I could say, like, well, I want a very solid grid here. We have 12 images. Maybe I want to do 3 by 4. So I could do something like that where we have a 10 by 60. Or something like that where we have 10 by 85, where we have a slightly wider columns. But Even if this was slightly less, where we have uneven number of columns in each row, it's still even as far as this grid, as far as the amount of space between each one and the amount of space between each row. Yes?
You're doing inspect there and you're changing the style. Is it going to stay or do you have to go back and the bracket and say?
No, the inspect element. Have we not gone over the inspect element?
No.
Oh, okay. I apologize. This is just a preview.
Okay.
Don't have much time to get into it right now. Let's definitely let's.
I saw it and I didn't really know how to use it. I couldn't figure out where my mistake was.
Yeah.
To show you.
Let's definitely talk about this next week or two, in addition to the JavaScript stuff, because this is a very, very helpful tool. But as you would suspect, this is just a preview, so we would still have to go into brackets and edit it there.
Now, if you make it long so that there are two columns that go all the way down, will that scroll or?
So right now we're not doing that overflow. So say that again. I said say that we go to just like 2 columns here, so that it's a lot wider, or just say that we have the rows spread out a lot more. So right now, as I scroll, it's just going to kind of scroll the header along with everything else and have like the footer down here. So if we want to have them spaced out that much, that's a lot. But yeah. Yeah, we could, in addition to this, do a few different things. One is, just like we're doing for the about, we could constrain the area for the thumbnails, so it would only scroll within that area, keeping the header and the footer in the same space. We could also, as David showed you, we could fix the header here, so that even though we scroll everything else, the header would still be on top of everything and it would stay the same space. But right now, if it's too much information, we're just simply scrolling the entire page, and the footer is just falling in line after that. So let's find a happy medium here. Let's go to. I want to do 4 columns. However, I don't want them to be spaced out quite this much. It looks like if I want them to be 4 columns, I would have to make it a little bit more than that. So somewhere between that and that. But say I want 4 columns and I just want them to be spaced out maybe about that much. So 30 by 21. What I can do is I can set the margin to 30 by 21. And then for the container, the thing that actually contains these thumbnails, I can make that smaller. So the thing that contains these thumbnails is div.content. So just like we have before for the history page and the about page, I'm going to go, or the video page rather, I'm going to say body hash photo page. Then I'm going to say space div hash content. And let's go ahead and use the width and the margin 0 pixels auto. So let's set up a width. I'm not sure what it needs to be. So let's just guess. Let's do a width of 800 pixels. And we'll do the margin 0 pixels auto. Just and did I save this? I did not save the HTML. So we're almost close there. I'll put up the inspect element just so I can see exactly what it needs to be. So something like that, about 590. That'll give us a nice grid of the 4x3. So we can also figure that out even without the inspect element, just by simply changing, saving and refreshing, and saving and refreshing too. So we have a width of 590. Let's also give it a little bit of margin from the header and the footer. And let's take a look at that. So we now have our photo gallery. Our photo gallery for each of these, as we click on each one, it's going to go to a different tab or a different window where it's showing us the larger version of that thumbnail. Any questions on that? Okay. So last thing, really quick, I want to talk about the hover effect. So let's go back to our history page for a minute. Say that we put in some anchor tags here. So if we go back to our history, if we set up this first lorem ipsum with an anchor tag that's going to go, it doesn't really matter, it goes somewhere. And so we surround lorem ipsum with an anchor tag. And let's set up the second one too. It doesn't really matter. It's the first few words here. Naturally, a anchor tag is going to be blue and underlined. And we can see that here. As we hover over the anchor tag itself, we get the little hand pointer icon. Now, as you already know, we can go ahead and customize what our anchor tags look like. And this is one of those things where you probably want all of your anchor tags to look about the same. So we don't necessarily have to determine what body we're inside of. We can just simply say that all of our anchor tags, maybe we want the color to be red. And if we don't want it to be underlined, then we say text decoration, none. Cool. So that means that our anchor tags are going to be red, and they are not going to have the underline, in case that's something we don't want. So when we hover over it, again, we get that pointer icon, which gives the viewer some feedback, letting them know that this is something that they can actually click on. In addition to that feedback, we can also change something about this anchor tag when we hover over it. We have to set up in our CSS, we're going to say a colon, and this is a regular colon, not a semicolon, a colon hover. And then we're going to do a set of curly braces. So whatever we put inside these curly braces is what's going to change when we actually hover over our anchor tags. So for example, say that the only thing we want to change is changing the color from red to green. What we can do is we can say inside a hover, we're going to say color 00FF00, which as everyone knows is green. So if we do that color change there, then as we hover over this is now green. Now, you'll notice that we do not have the text decoration none in here. We don't have to repeat anything which is naturally going on with the anchor tags. We only have to talk about what it is we're changing. So say we have a whole bunch of ridiculous stuff going on with the anchor tags. We're going to say font weight bold. We're going to make the font size a bit bigger. Let's make it italicized too. So if we have a whole bunch of stuff going on with this, we have italics, bold, we have bigger text, all of that happening within our anchor tags. But the only thing that's in the hover is the green, and that's the only thing that's going to change. We don't have to repeat anything else. It's still going to keep all these other properties and just simply change the only thing that we're actually changing in the A hover. Now I want to show this with images, but before we leave this, by the way, I would highly recommend not changing the size as far as the hover. So say that we don't have font size on our anchor tags, but we do add it for our hover effect. What you're going to see is that yes, as we hover over this, it is changing the size, but it pushes everything else around it, which is kind of just awkward from a user interface standpoint. Sometimes we might want that for like maybe images, maybe we want them to go a little bit bigger when we hover over them. But even in that case, very often it's going to push other things around it. I would recommend staying away from as far as making it bigger. But if that's something you really want to do, just let me know and I can try and show you better ways to do that so it doesn't push other stuff around it. But like I said, I want to talk about this with images. First, let's take a look at... I gotta take that off. It's just really annoying. First, let's take a look at our photo gallery. So let's say with our photo gallery, where is that? With our photo gallery, we want to create some sort of effect when we actually hover over these thumbnails. We already have the cursor going on here. That's fine because it's an anchor tag that's surrounding these images. But say that we want to add in something else here. For our photo page, our photo HTML, we are already identifying all of these thumbnails with the class thumb. That's the anchor tag that's surrounding the image itself. One thing we could do is for our anchor tags that have the class thumb, we could create a hover effect just for these thumbnails. Now, up above, we have a:hover. The important part of this, which is doing the hover, is the :hover part. What we have before that colon can be whatever it is that we're actually trying to identify. So in the case of a thumb, we can say a.thumb: hover. If we were talking about content for whatever reason, we wanted to create a hover effect over content, we would say div-content: hover. So the :hover again is what we're adding onto however we would normally identify the thing that we're trying to create a hover effect for. So if we do a.thumb: hover, one thing we could do is we could have an opacity change. So for example, we could say opacity 0.9. So very, very close, but just very slight. Let's take a look at that. So we have our thumbnails. As I hover over each one, it's hard to tell in this projector. Let's make it a little bit more extreme. 0.7. So as I hover over each one of our thumbnails, you can see that there's a slight opacity change, kind of making it a little bit darker. But it gives the user just a little bit of feedback as far as what's going on. We could also reverse this effect, so that instead of getting darker, or at least more transparent, we could say we want the opacity on regular thumbnails. We want the 0.7 on regular thumbnails. And then when we hover it, we're going to set the opacity to 1. 1 means fully opaque. What that means is it's going to start off a little bit darker, a little bit more transparent, and as we hover over each of these, it goes to full brightness or full opaqueness, which gives us, again, a little bit of feedback going on there. Another thing we can do is this going to mess things up? Let's take a look. Another thing we can do is we can add in maybe a border. So let's say a border of 2 pixels, 2 pixels solid white. Yeah. So as we hover over each of these, it is adding in that white border. But as you can see, as it's putting in that border, it's also kind of shifting things around a little bit, because right now this is really tight in there. Let's go ahead and adjust that margin just a little bit, particularly this 21. So I'm not down to well, yeah. If we want to add in the border, the better way of doing it is if we're going from one border color to another. So say that we go from a black border to a white border. That way it already has a border in there, so as we hover over that, it's not knocking things around because it's not adding a border in that space. So if we're adding in that border, we would still want to adjust the margin slightly so we can still fit 4 by 3. But as we do that up, it's now changing the border color as well as adding in the opacity. So it's doing 2 things there. Now, you don't necessarily have to do this with your photo galleries, but it is definitely a nice effect to have something that you're actually hovering over, whether it's text links, whether it is the thumbnails, to have that extra bit of an effect, like as you hover over that, giving the user a little bit more feedback than just simply hitting that icon. But yeah, any questions on any of that? Okay. Does anyone have to run really quick? Do you have time for just like one more thing? Maybe like 5-10 minutes? And then have to run? Okay. So, one last thing. We have our navigation up here. And as we hover over each one of them, there are links. So that as I hover over them, it's giving us the pointer icon. But say that we wanted to do something crazy, like change the color of this text. Now, it's an image, so we can't actually change anything about the image itself. However, you might see that in the images folder that I provided with you guys, we have an alternate version which is yellow of each of our menu items that are here. So we have about in white, about in yellow, and you'll notice if you actually open these up, they are exactly pixel perfect, exactly in the same place and the same size. So it's sometimes a little bit tricky to export them that way, but that is an option that we can do in our Photoshop. So we have 2 different images. They're pixel perfect, except for the color change here. If our text for our header if this was just normal text, so instead of a video image, we actually had the word video here. In our CSS, we could set it up so that the anchor tags, they start off at white, and then as you hover over them, it just goes to yellow. But if we're using images as our menu, which again is kind of that special case where we definitely want to have a specified font, but we can't find it in Google Fonts or Typekit, then what we can do is we can basically flip back and forth between those 2 images as we hover over them. We can do all of this with a CSS, but the first thing we need to do is we need to make some changes in our HTML. So, right now I'm on the photo gallery page. But essentially, when I'm making changes to this header, I would have to go back into our other HTML pages and make the same changes there. So, what I want to do is let's start with this first one, this first anchor tag. I'm going to separate this out so that the anchor tag itself is on a different line than the image. So this image is right now linking to logo 0, which is the white version, logo 0.png. The yellow version is logo 1. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put both image tags for logo 0 and logo 1 inside of this anchor tag. So inside this anchor tag I have 2 different image tags, one for logo 0, one for logo 1, both inside of here. Right now, if I take a look at this, I would see both logos just side by side, both kind of within this anchor tag. So, what we want to tell the browser is we want to start off by hiding this yellow version and only showing this yellow version when I'm hovering over the anchor tag. When I'm hovering over the anchor tag, no. Show the yellow version and hide the white version. So, in order to do this, first, let's go ahead and give the anchor tag itself a class. Let's give it a class menu. Next, on the image tag, the first one, the white version, let's go ahead and give it a class. White menu. The second one, or let's call it white image. Doesn't really matter, but yeah, let's call it white img. The second one, let's call it class yellow img. So we added a class to menu. We added a class to the anchor tag. We added a class to the first image tag. And we added a class to the second image tag. So far, there's no changes in the HTML. We still see both images side by side. Now, in our CSS, let's take a look at this. If I want to reference this anchor tag with the class menu, and I'm going to be doing this for the other images later on, but if I want to reference this anchor tag with the class menu, I would do a.menu. If I want to reference the image tag, which is inside of the menu, then I could do image dot the class name. We have image.white image or image.yellow image. Or with the CSS, I can be even more specific with these two by saying I want to talk about the image with the class white image inside of a.menu. So far, that's not making much of a difference whether I say that it's inside of a.menu or not. However, for this particular effect, we do want to get this specific with it. We want to talk about the image with class white image, specifically inside of a menu. Same thing for the yellow image. Now, before we get into hover effects, whenever we think about this kind of interactivity, we first want to think about how things are going to start off. So before we get into the hover, what does this look like when we first load the page? When we first load the page, we want to see the white image and we want to hide the yellow image. So for yellow image here, a.menu, image with the class yellow image, I'm going to say display none, which is the CSS way of saying that I don't want to see this particular thing right now. So we don't have to specify that yes, we want to see white image, because that's going to be what the default is. It's automatically going to show us that. So we don't actually need to put anything in here just yet. So right now, the only thing I've done is add in display none to the yellow image inside of the anchor tag with the class menu. So now when I load this, that yellow image is gone. Any questions so far? Now, I'm going to copy both what I'm doing for a.menu, image white image, and a.menu, image yellow image. I'm going to copy both of those. And after a.menu, but before the image, before the space even, I'm going to put in colon other for that second cell. So we have image white image and image yellow image normal, and we have image white image and image yellow image when we're hovering over the anchor tag. So when we're hovering over the anchor tag for white image, I'm going to say display. For the yellow image, when I'm hovering over this, I'm going to say display inline, which is just basically telling the browser I do want to show this up. So, this one doesn't actually, we don't really need this one if it's empty, and we don't really need this one if it's empty. But we have these three rules in our CSS, and it's broken out into two different parts. The first part is what it looks like when we first load the page. Everything without a colon hover is what it looks like when we first load the page. Then, when we do hover over a menu, we're doing two things at once. When we hover over a with the class menu, we are hiding the white image by saying display none. Also, when we're hovering over a menu, we are showing the yellow image with display inline. So it's flipping the visibility between both of these images. So let's take a look. When I hover over this, when I refresh it, now as I hover over this image, it looks like it's changing the color of the text, but in reality, we're going back and forth between two different images. We're hiding that white image simultaneously of showing the yellow image. Now, right now I'm using classes for everything, which means we can repeat this functionality over and over again without repeating our CSS. We just need to make some other changes in our menu. Do this really quick. For each of our anchor tags, which is surrounding one of our image tags, we don't have to put it on different lines. I'm putting on different lines just to kind of make it a little bit more clear to myself, because when it's all on one line, it can be sometimes a bit hard to read. So the first thing we're doing is we're adding in this class to all of our anchor tags. We have the class of menu. We are adding in the class of white image to all of the images that are ending with the 0. And for each of these images, we're copying and pasting it so that it's going to go to the 1 version or the yellow version. Copy and paste that image tag, go to the 1 version. Copy and paste that image tag, go to the 1 version. Same thing here. And lastly, for that second image tag, we want to make sure that all of them have the class yellow image. So we're just following the same pattern that we did with the very first one. And because we have all of those images in here, because they're all pixel perfect, it's going to work the same exact way with the CSS that we set up. Now I keep saying pixel perfect. If it is a slightly different size, then as you hover over it, you're going to see that it's going to shift over. Or if it's in a slightly different position, you might see it like shift over as we do the hover over. So it can be a little bit tricky to make sure that both images, the white version as well as the yellow version, or whatever you're going for the ultimate, looks exactly the same in Photoshop when you actually export it out. But if you can get that, then yes, you have this effect where it's as we hover over this, it's swapping back and forth between those two images. But cool. Yes, absolutely. So that's everything that I want to go over today. Do you want the HTML or the CSS? Yeah. So that's everything that I want to go over today. Like I said, for the homework, you're going to be making some progress on your website. For everybody, that's going to be something a little bit different depending on where you are with the website. But like I said, a good benchmark to think about is that as of today, hopefully you have at least that about page or that first interior page done. By the end of next week, just like I was doing today, hopefully you can use that template for your other interior pages. So for your video, history, and photo gallery pages, kind of using that template, but just swapping out the content itself. And then over the week after that, if you have all of that done, then you can kind of maybe worry about like your home page or maybe tweaking things here and there. So like I said, sometimes you will do something pretty different for your home page as far as the design goes. Sometimes you might want to keep it relatively the same. It's up to you. But a lot of what I'm talking about with this feedback, as far as these extra things, like as far as the covers, those are things that are really great to have, like in a website. I'm not necessarily requiring that, but as you have time, it's definitely something to add there. So whether you're talking about any sort of anchor links that you have, whether it's your menu or anchor links that you have within your copy, like adding some feedback, so it's not just simply blue and underline, but you have some more style on your anchor links. But even also with your photo gallery, so that you have some sort of feedback when it comes to your photo galleries or thumbnails. I did a combination of a border chain as well as an opacity change. Maybe that just doesn't make sense for what your content is, or maybe this isn't good to you. But there's a lot of different ways you can kind of do some sort of extra feedback more than this. We can cover over those thumbnails. But cool. As always, let me know if you guys have any questions. And next week, like I said, we're going to be introducing JavaScript. I'd like to also get into that inspect element, because that is